Greetings and welcome to Writers on Writing. I am your host, Dr. Brenda Greene, Executive Director of the Center for Black Literature and Director of the National Black Writers Conference, and also a professor at Medgar Evers College. This radio show is paid for by Medgar Evers College, and we come to you every Sunday and give you, our listening audience, an opportunity to hear writers from the African diaspora talk about their work, their craft, and their lives. I am very pleased to have with me today AJ Verdelle, who's written Miss Chloe. So welcome, AJ.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here and so glad to talk about Toni Morrison.
Okay, we'll talk about Toni Morrison, but I just want to give our listening audience some background information about you. You have published fictions, essays, and a memoir, of course, and you're very motivated by a love of language, something that you and Toni Morrison have in common. Your first novel was The Good Negress, which was published in 1995, and it's continually been in print. And this is your second book, Miss Chloe. And you are now working on another book, which you'll talk to us about Black cowboys, but you are an essayist and a working mother, and of course, a teacher. Your students are very, very important to you. So welcome again. And let's begin by having you talk about what motivated you to write Miss Chloe.
Miss Chloe. Well, honestly, the motivation was pretty much external. When Toni Morrison passed in 2019, I had known her since 1997, and the New York Times was actually racing around trying to find someone who had a personal relationship with Morrison rather than these professional relationships where people knew her as a teacher or as an icon or as a person who ran the atelier at Princeton. They were looking for somebody who had a personal relationship with her. So, of course, one of my former Princeton students was working at the New York Times, which is one of the things I talk about in the book, how different schools create different ultimate environments for the students. And so anyway, one of the Princeton students was working at the New York Times and said, I remember my professor and they were friends and let me call her. And so she found me and I worked on an article very closely with this young lady for about 3 days. I remember I turned it in at 2 a.m. and I didn't realize really that newspapers work like that. I sort of thought they had regular hours or something, but
they do like writers do, right?
They do like writers do. They're writers at the newspaper, right?
That's right.
So we worked on it and they had a fancy software program where she could communicate. And I worked, pretty seriously with them about things that I could say that hadn't already been said. And after I published that, people were real interested in whether I had a longer story to tell, which I believed, quite honestly, Dr. Greene, that I did not. I didn't think that I had enough to say. So I took 3 weeks, started writing to see how much. And then at the end of the 3 weeks, I called the agent back and I said, actually, I think there probably is material here. So I worked on it for 2 years, which is very, very short for me. And I thought I was writing a grieving book. I thought I was writing a book about losing her and losing her voice and losing her very obvious power. But then once I started working on it, I realized that my relationship with her had been a gift and a serendipitous surprise. So I tried to make the book that, a gift and a serendipitous surprise for other people, right?
I think it comes across like that. It really does. Because I found out so much about you in reading the book. But just to go back, I'm curious as to what you did in those 3 weeks when you were deciding, because as you said, you had not thought about really writing the book. So I know that you talk about writing a lot of this from memory. What were you doing during those 3 weeks to help you decide to come to that decision?
Well, mostly I was drafting, which
Okay.
I have a real particular perspective on drafting. I take the word seriously. Draft means breezy, just loose. And I believe that drafting is for discovery.
Yes.
I woke myself up early because that's where the most surprise is for your imagination, if you can sort of catch yourself on the cusp of sleep. And I would just go straight to the notebook and I would write for maybe 90 minutes or so just to see what emerged. And then I made a commitment to type all that every day. But what I noticed was almost every memory I wrote down, it almost made room for a new one.
That's what writing does. It's generative.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And so I started to have all these sort of snippet like memories of times we'd spent together. Like there's a moment in the book where I talk about Morrison coming down the steps at a building at Princeton. And she looked so regal and so enormous to me that I thought she could have on a superhero cape and it would still be the same memory. And that wasn't something I carried around with me. That was an afternoon that I had kind of forgotten about. But she was doing something at what was then called the Woodrow Wilson School. They've since changed it because, I don't know if you know, but Woodrow Wilson resegregated the federal government. And so he's not somebody we hold in high regard anymore. And so they changed the name of the school, but she had an event at the school and she asked me to meet her. And I met her afterwards and it just was like watching, I don't know, Superwoman come down the steps. And I had forgotten about that. But once I remembered it, I remembered the feeling and I remembered thinking, should I go up the steps and meet her or should I just wait down here? And, the questions. And these are little things that I just hadn't carried in the foreground. But when you're writing a book, you realize, yes, I was standing at the bottom of the steps seeing her as a superhero. And I actually did say to her, you could be wearing a cape. And she thought it was funny. And I don't think I might not have thought about that ever again. So it was a lovely experience, and an experience really for me. I came away feeling a lot of gratitude that I could get that done.
Okay, so I want you to talk more about the significance of of Toni Morrison in the American literary canon. You talk a lot about her significance. You use terms like she was dense, driving, and drenching, individually and cumulatively. And watch out you don't drown. And then she maintained a wild and relentless, sweeping fascination with unexamined facts of the past. So she reimagined all American literature. So from your perspective, why was she so significant to American literature? Why was her work?
Well, number one, Morrison was as much a master of the English language as anyone writing. There's no one, past or present, who some people might compete with her, but she's really at the top of understanding language, manipulating language, examining language, hearing language, learning the roots of language. One of the things people don't really notice, I don't think much, is that nowhere in Morrison will you find that paradigm of Black as evil and white virtuous. She's just excised that from her use of the English language. And it's very run-of-the-mill for us as people who are chattering and not studying language to use words like blackmail and blacklist and blackball and none of that. None of those tones, none of those underpinnings exist in any of her work anywhere. So for me, that's the first huge thing, that she excised in her writing the Black is evil modality.
Yes. Yes.
But also, she was unafraid. And so if she decided that something was worth excavating, she went for it. And she was very confident in her own emotional truth. She felt like she could empathize and therefore write how others might feel. But another thing that she did that was so important, and that I think we shared, is that she recognized the knowledge of the people who were around when she was learning and young and growing. So I have a quote in the book that she used in a different book where she talks about she understood that she had book learning, but that all the people around her had a wisdom that was different and that she had yet to reach. And so she developed a great respect for the wisdom of people who did not have the book learning that she had. Her grandmother and her mother's friends and her father's friends, and the history that they had to tell. So she elevated us as wise people, even though the society kept saying, you know nothing, you say nothing, you have nothing. And she thought, no, that's not a reality. And so, although it's about all kinds of struggle, her characters come through as very strong, survivalist, yes, tenacious, and understanding that regardless of what other people say about our lives, this is life. This is the life we have. It's not, you don't get redos. And so she does a lot of work showing us how we have lived respecting our own lives while around us, those same lives are disrespected. That tension and that chasm, and showing us, she really, really deeply believed that after all we've been through, words, you can find videos of her saying, after all we've been through. So her position was, after all we've been through, we are victorious.
That's right. We may be scarred, but we triumph. Right.
That's right.
We continue to go.
Exactly.
Right. And yes. And you talk about the wisdom of the elders in your own writing and how that affected you as a writer and as a scholar. You want to share some of that in your book? You talk about that in with respect to your essays and in the Good Negress. You want to share that?
Well, I mean, I agree with her. I was a young girl and I read very early.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Sorry.
That's okay. I was I have a sister, she's 3 years older than me. And when she went to school, she taught me how to read. So before I went to kindergarten, I was already reading because my sister was in second grade and I wanted to do what she did. And Morrison was also an early reader. And so when you are a reader at a very young age, you are mystified by language because you know that the language on the page is not being said to you. You're not listening to it. You have this sense of, wait, is this a thing or is it not a thing? Like, it's not something you can pick up, but you can understand it. So you have this kind of shock going on, I think, as an early reader. And I think Morrison was similar. But at the same time, you're still burning yourself. You're still falling down. You're still doing all the dumb things that you're doing because you're a little person and you don't know. And you're looking to your parents like, I guess I wasn't supposed to do that because I've burned myself or my knee is bleeding, right? So you have this constant interaction between what seems very sophisticated and kind of invisible and mature, which is the reading thing, but real, which is I can't do anything by myself. So it was a great tension, and it raises your respect for the people who can protect you and have protected you and are waiting at the crosswalk for you to come across the street and who tell you things that keep you from injuring yourself. And so her respect for her elders was monumental, and so was mine. And as she got older, I, of course, was getting older too. But in your mind, as we all know, we don't think of ourselves as growing old, right? So in my mind, I'm 29 or 36 or whatever, and Morrison is getting older. And so as she got older and we did more talking on the phone, it really did start to remind me of those people who had advice for me. And she had advice for me. I mean, when we talked, she would make recommendations, she would encourage me, she would challenge me. And that was the same model of how my grandmothers brought me up. And so even though I was mothering age and I was getting older, she sort of, as she aged, she slid older people that I remembered from when I was much younger. And I think mostly it was because we were talking on the phone, right? Because she was becoming immobile and my grandmothers had become immobile. And so the phone became a lifeline. And the last engagements we had with each other were all on the phone. So it was like sliding back into my youth.
Oh, that's beautiful. What would you say is the greatest gift? If you had to name the greatest gift that you received from Toni Morrison?
Well, I think, Toni Morrison managed to offer a gift, not just to me and to us as African Americans and to us as writers, but also to the world. Having said that, though, the gift she gave me was different, me personally. And the greatest gift that she gave me was recognizing my writing. I didn't know her. I grew up reading Toni Morrison. I believe that I was reading her prematurely because I was 11 or so when I started reading her books.
What did you start? Which book did you start with?
I started with The Bluest Eye.
The Bluest Eye, yes.
Yeah, my mother had it on the shelf. I never read Sula until I was grown. And that's what makes me think my mother knew I was reading her books, because Sula is very alarming for a young person.
Yes.
So I think my mother just didn't put it there because she knew I was reading everything and didn't think that was the best thing for me to read. But when I wrote The Good Negress, Morrison was sent a copy by somebody, and she sat down and wrote a letter to my publisher commenting on the book. And my publisher said, well, she sent that because she knows we're going to use it for a blurb. We're going to call and ask for permission, but she never would have sent that if that's what wasn't her intention.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah, so out of nowhere, Toni Morrison is saying, this is an amazing book. And for me, that changed my life, probably more than writing the book. I mean, obviously, you can't be recognized for something you haven't done. So writing the book changed my life. But having her notice it still gives me shivers.
Yes, I love that story, and I've shared it with other people since reading your book, because not only was it significant in what she did, but you had the wherewithal to think about taking your manuscript and sending it to people. You knew about the publishing business. You knew how important it was to get other readers. And I think that's a writing strategy that people need to know about, because there's so many people who want to write, but they don't realize the significance of getting it read and published. I want to talk a little bit about that.
Well, publishing is a tough business. Publishing is not soft and sweet and kind. There's lots of money involved if you are published by a main publishing house. Lots of personalities involved, editors, marketing people, assistants. And that's after all the serious work of trying to get a book written. Yes. So getting a book read, I think, as you suggest, is enormously important. And I decided I'm going to take the 25 people who care about me, who are closest to publishing. So today, Dr. Greene, you might be one of those people.
Well, thank you.
But if you're wanting your book read, you don't want your book read just by people who love you. right? That's a criteria, but that's not enough. Has to be people who love you, who have some connection to publishing, whether they've been in publishing once in the past, whether they've published themselves, whether their husband is a literary lawyer, whatever it is that has some cusp of a connection to publishing, so that if they love what you've done, they have something they can do with it, just like the person who sent it to Toni Morrison. I couldn't send her a book. I could have sent it to her publishing house, but that's not effective. But somebody who knew me and cared about me had enough of a cusp of a connection, a book to her. So when we write, we learn to make decisions. And James Baldwin talks about this. James Baldwin said, writers have 80 million decisions to make, so get busy. And that number is not an overestimate, because you write all the words you write, let's say 200,000 words, and then you're making decisions about them again and again as you revise the book. But you're also making decisions. When am I going to send it out? When is it ready? Who are the 25 people? Do I need to add something? Do I need to take out something? So you're making all these decisions. And so one of the things that we writers should do is build confidence in our decision making, right? Because you're making all these decisions. So because now I have confidence in my decision making, because I've written 2 books and however many essays. So let's say I've made 240 million decisions now. So that means the decision that I make, I have to be confident in, because I've made so many. But what happens for a lot of us is we write, we think it's a solo, private, scary little thing that we're doing, and we don't let what we're doing strengthen us. We look for the accolades to strengthen us, when really that decision-making is what is going to help you get those accolades.
Because that is so important.
Yeah.
You also bring up, or implied in your statement, is the need to have a community of other people who are to be part of a writing community or literary community, so that you're not by yourself. You know, that if you're a writer and you're an academic. And one of the things that I realized in doing the National Black Writers Conferences was just having this network of writers and scholars who are around, who you could talk to. Not that I was sharing my writing, but at least it was motivating, and you knew there were people around who respected the art, who respected writing, who respected what people would do. I remember going to the Gwendolyn Brooks Creative Conference at Chicago State, and just being in a room filled with the writers. It's so important to immerse yourself with other people who are doing the work that you want to do, and as you said, to trust them, to get the feedback from them.
Yes, and also, especially if you're writing, that's not your primary gig, you're writing sort of on the side, it's more important to have that community, because you need to be validated. Yes. You need people who have the same references, who are staying up late or getting up early, or wondering what to do with their manuscripts. For example, there was a movie not too long, well, I guess it was a long time ago. It starred Jack Nicholson, and he was a writer. And in the background of his scenes, there were all these shelves with all these different stacks of paper in different colors. And I explained, I said, when I do a new version of my manuscript, I always print it on a different color, so that the manuscript I finished this summer, it was yellow, and the manuscript that I have now is green. And even though I have both manuscripts in my house, I can tell the current one from the old one, right? Well, that has helped a lot of people to not be constantly printing manuscripts on white paper when you can't tell one from the other. Or if you have to use white, put in a date footer or whatever, just to be able to share tricks that help you get the work done, right? If you can't tell one manuscript from the other, you can't even pick up the stuff and run out of the house, So especially if you're doing it part-time or you're just getting started.
Most of us are doing part-time. We can't do it full-time. You have to have something as backup, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. Even though when I say to my students at Morgan that I couldn't afford to teach at Morgan if I didn't write. They don't get it. So one of the things is a lot of times our backup, which feels protective, it's not really giving us as much as the work, right?
Yes.
If we can acknowledge that, you know, I'm feeling better about writing than I am about my bank job. That helps us spend more time writing, you know, figuring out how to get those words down.
You end the book by the messages, the lessons you learned from Toni. As we come to a close, would you share some of the messages that you think are very important that she left for you?
Well, I'll just talk about the biggest one because, as you say, the end of the book, it lists them all. I mean, it was actually funny to me that I wanted to do that I wanted to make that list.
I love that list. That's
well,
great.
I'm glad, but everything that's on the list is referenced in some scene or some scenario in the book. But I was like, I want to isolate these. So there is a section in the back of the book for anybody who wants to go and learn the major lessons that Toni Morrison taught me. But the biggest one is that genius is not as rare as the world wants us to believe. Now, there are very few overall geniuses, and I think Morrison was one of them. I think in many aspects of her life, she showed genius, imaginative, financial, leadership, all kinds of ways. But we also have, you know, genius potters and genius professors and genius social workers. We have people who are genius in certain areas. And because our society does this wacko thing of trying to separate and isolate and deride, we are taught not to use the word genius, even though, as I say, you can find genius on the street. You know, I have seen bus drivers help people in ways that I haven't even noticed those people need help, and I'm a very compassionate person. So Morrison's idea was, let's start realizing the genius in all of us and grow into your genius, please. That was her position. Grow into your genius, and all this other stuff will stop feeling like so much oppression.
That's a beautiful way to bring this to a close. I want to thank you for writing, Miss Chloe, and for giving us some insights into Toni Morrison as well as into you, because you've given us some words of wisdom also. As you said, she affected you as a writer, as a scholar, as a mother, even. That's right. Remember the story she told about her son and, you know, what you do with boys. That was very interesting. I have two sons. Yes, and yes. So I could relate to it. So I want to encourage our listening audience to go out and purchase Miss Chloe. And if it's not in your bookstore, please order it. It's a wonderful way of getting to know Toni Morrison more deeply. I don't know if they can see it here. There we are.
It is. I'll hold it up too.
Okay, great. Yours comes up more clearly. Okay, Miss Chloe by AJ Verdelle. And remember, the writer is always reading, the reader is always writing. Keep reading and writing. Empower yourselves as readers and writers. And watch me, or watch us also on YouTube, and come back next week. This radio show is paid for by Medgar Evers College. Have a wonderful day, AJ.